Okay, so chances are we just finished up the section on finding dry standard and wet monitored points, which is a good time to talk to you about the following. All right, the next set of the standard or set of standard references, we're going to pull up on the screen here in just a second, but they identify the necessity of finding everywhere the water went. Now, this is really important because everywhere that the water goes, we have to monitor. And finding the points that are wet doesn't mean we've done all of our job. Finding out the point where we go from wet to dry means that we can begin to set a perimeter of where it is that we need to be working, which is really important. If we have to contain off these areas to make a drying chamber, to make it dry faster, or because we have contamination, a category 3 loss, then we need to know where our actual damages are. And if there's one thing that people mess up super consistently, it's going to be this. They use a non-penetrating meter when they should be using screws into materials. Do screws cause damage? Yes, they do. But they also find the moisture that your non-penetrating meter can't find. So the standard of care is very specific about the fact that you need to find all the moisture. So this is what we're going to ask them to do. Go ahead and draw your attention down to the S500, section 10.6.8. Now, you may have a different section when it comes time for the standard to be updated, which it will be in 2021. We may have a slightly different thing in front of you, and if we do, just be aware it will be probably, if there's no change, then even though it may say 2015, it's still accurate. In 2021, if there is a change, we'll switch them out for you so that you always know the most current version. So 10.6.8, find full extent of intrusion. An initial moisture mapping inspection should, now remember, should means if you don't do it, you don't meet the standard of care, which means no one should have a problem with your contractor doing this. In fact, they should make your contractor do this. Should be conducted to identify the full extent of water intrusion, including the identification of affected assemblies, building materials, and the edge of water migration. The initial inspection should, that means the first one should include this, should continue in all directions from the source of water until the restorer identifies and documents the extent of the migration. So guys, this means in every direction, and you need to think of things as being three-dimensional. Just because I wet a floor surface doesn't mean it's just the surface of my finished floor that's wetted. It can also be the concrete underneath it, or the subfloor underneath it, or the floor joists underneath it, and or the garage, or the basement, or the other assembly that's below. If it's a second story, it's first story. So in every direction, all right, in all three dimensions. So right, left, forwards, backwards, up, and down. They're supposed to find all this. And I'm saying this really detailed because as your contractor listens to this, I want him to know what it is we're looking for. And you haven't found the edge of that until you found the point that it goes from wet to dry in all three dimensions. Guys, if people are going to screw something up, this is the single number one biggest problem you can possibly have. Because if you don't know it's wet, you cannot possibly track it until it's returned to its pre-loss moisture content, nor can you identify the fact that it may have category 3 elements that make it not safe, not healthy. So super, super important stuff to know, guys, and you need to ensure that this is done. So this is your first little section, 10.6.8. Now, next it says in pockets of saturation. What's notable about this is oftentimes insurance companies do not like you doing discovery. If it's not visibly wet, they don't want you to look for it. But the standard of care and the statutes and best practices say that you're supposed to find everything. General duty clause from OSHA says that you owe a place of employment and work free from known hazards. Well, if you don't check, you don't know. If you don't go into materials layer by layer if necessary, which the standard also requires, you don't know the edge of it. So this is what we're trying to do. We want you to go through and find stuff. And guys, if there has to be a set of screws into something, then there has to be a set of screws into something. Our job is not to preserve the property. Our job is to find the damage. Now, do I think we should do wholesale damage? No, do it as conservatively as you can find. Don't take and jackhammer up a floor if 2 screws will do the job instead. But if it takes jackhammering up the floor to get to the next material that you're concerned based on your professional experiences involved, then jackhammer the floor up. Tell everybody what you're going to do. Attempt to get everybody's agreement. But even if you can't get their agreement, you still need to do it unless someone tells you specifically not to. And if they tell you specifically not to, there should be releases associated with it. Okay? So, all the damage in all 3 directions. Pockets of saturation. Your restorer may or may not know that the standard says that you're supposed to do the following. Restorers should. Remember the should word, should. If you don't do it, you haven't met the standard. Should open assemblies. Walls, stairs, flooring, base wall areas, voids, that means underneath stairs, behind false walls, behind and around fireplaces, that kind of stuff, all right? And built-ins. What are built-ins? Built-ins are cabinets. So it just tells you that restorers should open assemblies. That means under cabinets, behind cabinets, because if in their professional experience water could be behind it, they need to find, based on 10.6.8, right, the perimeter of all the water intrusion. You can't find it if you don't get to the edge of it and know where that is. So you should be doing that. So it goes, restorers should open assemblies, walls, stairs, flooring, base wall areas, voids, built-ins, to assess pockets of saturation and remove unsalvageable, or contaminated materials and components. Exposed materials that remain in place should be cleaned and decontaminated prior to continued use. Next, 17.4.9. 19. Engineered and laminate floors, regardless of the category of water. If flooring swells, it is unrestorable. Restorers should check for subsurface moisture using an appropriate meter. So guys, what that means is, if you can get a meter into the flooring material without removing the flooring material, then meter the floor to know whether or not you have an issue there. And this is a problem where if you have water that goes and has contamination or hazardous elements in it, it takes it with it wherever it goes, and it can get trapped in between layers. So they want to know, did it come through your finished floor and down to the floor beneath? And can I tell you folks, more often than not, it absolutely positively is and does. So you need to know that. Next. Cabinets, attached materials. Restorers should identify and eliminate moisture migration below or behind built-in cabinets or fixtures. Guys, you need to know if it's behind or beneath. So right there it tells you you're supposed to do it. So an insurance company that says they don't want to take off your countertops and check behind, if the restorer believes that they haven't found the edge of the moisture or concerned that there may be moisture behind it, they're not in accordance with the standard. The standard says we're supposed to. Next, engineering and laminate floors. We did that again. If flooring swells, it is unrestorable. Restorers should check for subsurface moisture. Next one, vinyl sheet and VCT. Well, if it makes sense that you need to look below it for laminates and for engineered wood flooring, you would need to look underneath laminates too. Laminates and VCT, which is vinyl tiles, vinyl composite tile, that's VCT. Those tiles can hold moisture trapped underneath. Moisture trapped underneath tends to create mold growth, gets pushed into assemblies outside to find a way to escape and come to equilibrium, and can grow mold underneath the flooring materials and actually in the wall assemblies. So you have to know that those things are there, and your restorer should be checking for it. So, restorers should inspect to determine if water has migrated under finished floor materials. If it has, restorers should determine if the flooring needs to be removed due to progressive deterioration of the subfloor. That means it can rot out wood subfloors, or finished floor materials, or it's going to rot out the floor. Or you also have category 3 elements underneath that you need to clean. Folks, you will not generally be able to dry VCT or vinyl on concrete unless you can get underneath it, but hardly ever in a residential environment can you get underneath concrete to dry it. Normally it has to be removed to clean and to dry the substrate because it's going to take, and if you've ever seen vinyl tile with that lovely little pink and gray hue coming through, that's not a design element, that's mold and fungal growth and microbial growth multiplying and basically working up through the tile. All right, so if you've ever seen that before, now you know what it is. You get this around your toilets a lot. Not supposed to be there. We're supposed to be checking for it, so your restorer should be required to do that, and your carrier should pay for it. Next and last, 17.4.6 concrete. Water can migrate under floor coverings, which is kind of a duh, right? Duh. Around the perimeter of installations. All right, so you run tile up to cabinets, all right, or tile up to a floor. Water can penetrate back and around that, not have any water standing on the top, but have water in the little wells caught between the tile and the 2x4 sill plates or the wall, caught underneath the cabinets, in the voids underneath the cabinets. So it can do that. Flooring and substructural assemblies should be inspected to determine if the extent of moisture migration or the damage. All right, so we're supposed to be looking for is the water underneath, because we leave the water underneath, we don't dry it. It's going to affect the materials around it, which means it could cause the materials to fail cosmetically, it could cause them to fail structurally, or it could produce lots of lovely mold. And the only way we really like our mold is in a really, really, really good, like Shropshire or blue cheese. All right, we don't want the kind of molds that the wood grows. We want the kind of mold that the cheese grows. Yeah, okay. So, continuing on, restorers are cautioned that measuring and validating a concrete floor is sufficiently dry to enable suitability for the installation of moisture-sensitive or impervious floors, hardwood, bamboo, roll vinyl, VCT, laminates, etc., should be done by a competent and qualified expert. That means you probably should have your restorer bring in a flooring expert that tells you what moisture content all of those materials need to be so they can warranty the next installation of floor so it doesn't rot in place because someone didn't dry it. Happens all the time. And it comes down here and it says should be done by a competent and qualified expert in accordance with applicable standards. And they give you standards there in order for the customer's floor to be warranted. And this is what you want to drive towards, folks. Everyone will say, you know, concrete's always wet. Well, concrete is always wet. That's true. But the question is it so wet that it's going to create damage to the floor or finished floor surface you're putting in above it, and you can't leave it like that. So rather than argue with people over how wet is wet enough, the better discussion is the wood flooring installer, the vinyl flooring installer should look at the manufacturer's installation instructions, figure out what they say the relative humidity of the concrete or substrate should be, and then they, as a drying or as a professional flooring installer, should tell your mitigation specialist what conditions they need to deliver the house into so that they can warranty the material in the installation. Okay? So all this is wrapping up finding all the moisture in all three dimensions. Very, very important. If you don't find it, you just simply can't dry it. Alrighty, folks. I think this is the end of it. Sorry this is a long one, but we'll see you here ever so shortly in the next section. Bye now.